So here was my decision. My decision point was I had told you a few weeks ago that I was on the fence as to whether or not I was going to go with Acts, running through Acts, or whether or not I was going to go through someplace in the Old Testament. And in my head, I thought running through the minor prophets. Because how often do we run through the minor prophets? Not often. So I was like, okay, that's probably what I'm going to do. But then last week, when we did the Lord's Supper, I was reading through, as we were reading through the Lord's Supper, Paul makes the point several times about events that happen in the first 5 books of the Bible. Boom, boom, boom. So I figured, well, you know what? Paul is assuming that we have knowledge of those first 5 books. So let's do this. We've done Mark, we've done Romans. Let's run back and we'll start at the very beginning and we'll set the stage for the telling of the gospel. So what we're going to do is we're going to start right here, and we're going to start in Genesis, and we're going to chug along in Genesis. And that's kind of what I want to do. We'll do Genesis in about the next 14 weeks. Is that exciting? There's like 50 chapters of Genesis, so we are going to be chugging along. So here you go. Just so you know, you are invited on this journey, right? This is going to be a quick journey. We're going to take it, and we're going to run. We're going to go, right? This is your invitation to participation. You got to slow that down because it's or perspiration if you're up here in the lights. One of the two, right? We're inviting you to take this journey with us, and that's really what we want to do. We want to get into it. We want to have a look at it. We want to learn to get all of us set together and run through our journey together. Sound good? I think so too. So I'm inviting you, please join this journey with us. So before we do that, I'm going to move this over here so I have a little bit of moseying room. I figure it's important for us to kind of set definitions, especially as we talk. Because every now and then I'm going to say things. Now, I will tell you this. I do always have an interactive sermon, which means if I say something and you don't know what it is, or you got a question, that's the time to ask a question. So, for example, if I say something like Septuagint, you don't know what Septuagint is, that would be a good time to say, what is Septuagint? Okay, so here's what I did, is I put up here, I put a list of some things that maybe we should define before we walk into this. And what I'm doing is that from the baseline, I'm looking at people that maybe not have ever even attempted Genesis. So probably the first thing to talk about is Genesis, right? What does Genesis mean? Well, Genesis means the beginning. It's kind of from the original name, or the name that the Hebrews use on it, well, in the beginning. So Genesis is from the beginning point. That's good, right? So now we all got that. Okay, so Genesis is the beginning, so that's where we're at. We're going to be in Genesis. Now how about this one? This one's a little funkier. If I say Pentateuch. Pentateuch.
What does that mean?
There you go, Pentateuch. That's all right, that's fantastic. Pentateuch. Pentas for 5. It's the first 5 books of the 5 scroll heads. I had 2, I think. I think like Tukkets. But anyway, that's 5. It's probably all right. Here you go. 5. So that's the Pentateuch is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Also sometimes called the books of Moses. Also called the Law or the Torah. So when they say the Torah, the Law, or the books of Moses, that's what we're talking about. Make sense? Which leads naturally to Moses. Moses supposes his toes as his roses, right? You guys haven't seen Singing in the Rain in a while?
No. I have.
Well, Moses supposes erroneously. Anyway, so Moses, he is a guy who was born, he is a Hebrew who was born when it's illegal to be a male Hebrew. So what happens is he's born, and all the male Hebrews are supposed to be cast into the river, which of course he is. He's rescued. He's adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. He gets Egyptian educated. Ends up, a whole lot of stuff happens. Don't worry, we're going to go more in depth into this. But as you know, since it's called the books of Moses, he's the guy that God uses to write these 5 books. Great. Gospel. Let's talk about this for a second, just because I think gospel means good news. It's the good story. For us, a lot of times people say, well, Jesus came to die for us. And yes, that's part of it. But here, let me tell you what the gospel is at large. Gospel is God created us, right? And then we've pointed in the wrong direction. We've fallen. Then God sends His Son into the world to save us, right? His death saves us. And then we're restored in relationship to God. And then we party with Him. That's the arc of the gospel. That's the good news of the gospel. So yes, God sending His Son in, but the gospel's within the whole arc of everything. Then I say church. We should always define church just so you know. Church is not a building. It's us. Those of us that believe, all gathered together, knitted together as a quilt by God. And then, of course, God. Now, you may say, well, Rick, why do we need to define God? Well, because I think the beginning of Genesis, that's exactly what's happening. Is that Moses, when he's writing the Genesis, he starts out with that first sentence. And we see this so often. This first sentence is it's one amazingly important verse in the Bible. Because in this Bible, or in this verse, he defines the word God for us. See, because back then, when he was writing, he was raised in a world that had plenty of gods, right? He was raised in Egypt. And he was familiar with Osiris and Ra and all these other things. And when they met, they even called their pharaohs, like the president god or whatever. Everybody was a god. A god was just a spiritual super being. A superhero, if you will. Or supervillain.
But Superman's not a god.
But,
Neither is Batman.
well, so he would have been, so let's talk about Superman or Batman or Ant-Man or Spider-Man or any of those people. Back in that time, what they did would have qualified them to be called God. Or President Trump being a powerful figure, or President Obama, or all these other things. Because remember, the pharaohs were called gods too. Because they had control of life and death. There was a lot of... God was everywhere. So Moses starts out and saying, hey, listen, when you're talking about spiritual super beings, I'm not talking about what you're talking about. When I use the word God, I use the word God, but it's got a very specific meaning. And the God that I'm talking about isn't the strongest avenger. It isn't whatever. The God I'm talking about is the creator of everything.
Moses is saying this?
That's what Moses is saying. It's the same thing that Jonah says before he gets thrown off the boat. In Jonah, what's happening is that the ship's all getting tossed about, and there's a point where the captain of the ship says, each man to your gods. Go call whatever superhero. It's like somebody's picking up the bat phone, right? Somebody's picking up they're like, we want some spiritual superhero to save us. And when it comes down to Jonah, Jonah says the problem, it's on me, because let me tell you about when I say God, I don't mean some spiritual superhero. I mean the creator of the ocean, the creator of everything. So what happens is Moses is setting up and saying, boom, he's got this big statement right here. So when I say God, I'm not using the lowercase silliness. I'm talking about a creator. And actually in this verse we see about God all the omnis. In Churchland, we talk about God. We say He's omnipresent, omniscient, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, right? Omnipotent, all powerful. Because it takes a lot of power to create the universe, right? Omnipresence, right? He's got to be everywhere because He's got to be able to set the whole universe out there. Omniscient. He knows where everything's at because He put it there. So when we talk about that, in that sentence, you see a lot of stuff right there. So that's a big thing. So let me before we walk into this, let me tell you this. When we talk about the beginnings, there are a lot of debates, there are a lot of agreements. Would you agree with that? There's a lot of people that yell and yell and yell about this book, especially this next chapter and a little bit more that we're going to hit in a second. So I would say that there's debates or disagreements of those within the community or within the kingdom. And when I mean kingdom, I don't mean Southern Baptists. I mean anybody who is connected, anybody who says, if you confess your mouth, Jesus is the Lord, and believe in your heart, God raised him from the dead. Anybody that's tied into that. So, Catholic, Pentecostal, Presbyterian, whatever, Russian Orthodox, all of that, that's the community. Would you say within the community, within the kingdom, is there disagreements about how Genesis is read? Whole lot. Now, are there disagreements about the beginning of things between the people within the kingdom and the people outside the kingdom?
Oh, yeah.
Did you say there's disagreements? It's fair to say there's disagreements.
Everywhere.
What's that?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. So there's disagreements. Now, here's the next question. Now, what about agreements? Are there agreements that we within the kingdom have about the telling of Genesis? Yeah, and I think it's important for us to recognize where those agreements are. Because in the agreements, we're going to find the most important elements of this. And then, are there agreements with people outside? We're going to. I believe there are. They're going to. I think that when in Psalm 19, when God says the heavens declare the glory of God, I think that lesson right there is that there is evidence out there that they can see. And for us, it's important for that's when we're getting the gospel. See, the gospel isn't just a story in the book. The gospel includes us because we are part of that gospel. When we say, hey, listen, we have fallen, we have gone away, but Jesus died for us to redeem us so we can be now sons and daughters of God. That's the ark, right? It's the gospel ark. So if we understand where we have agreement, that's where we can build a bridge with people coming in. And we'll come right into this. So here's the deal. Debates within the kingdom, or within the community. We'll talk about this. You're looking at my little slide there. I've thrown up some of the most popular ideas about the book of Genesis. So depending how much you dug in it before, they're put up there. Now I put on one side, it's more figurative language. On the other side, it's more literal language. Now, if I told a moral story, a story to teach a lesson, is it true?
No, not always. The lesson is true.
The lesson's true though, right?
Right.
The truth is true. The story of the tortoise and the hare didn't have to happen, but does it teach a true lesson? So you look at it and you say, yes, the tortoise and the hare is true. Although there's not an account. So somebody can look at it, and then there's a lot of people that look at the story of Genesis, the very beginning here, and they see it as a moral play. It's not because they don't believe in the Bible, they just think it's a moral play. They say, yeah, it's absolutely true. It's true in what it's telling us. You know, God created humanity, and then something happened. Right? That's where they're at. So they look at it as a moral play. So that's on the very figurative extreme. And then we'll get to more literal as we come down. There's other folks, maybe you've heard this one, where they've talked about when they look at each of the days of creation, and they'll say, day one, oh, that's when He's doing this amazing, and this one it's not 24 hours, it's 14 billion years, and day two is 1 billion years, and 3, have you ever heard that? Kind of each day kind of is a little bit elastic. So they're literal in one sense, and they're figurative on what a day looks like. Now I will tell you this, we'll hit this a little bit. There's the gap theory. I almost am going to come down a little bit sounding like, if you ask, hey Rick, what do you believe? I'll be close to the gap theory, but only close. We'll go, gap theory is this. In the very beginning, the first verse was, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, right? So the gap theory is this. Verse 2 starts out with, what does your Bible say? Yeah, I like that. NLT kind of steps away without making a statement one or the other. What do you have? Yeah.
Oh, the earth was completely empty. There was nothing on the earth.
Okay, here's the challenge. There's a negating conjunction at the beginning of the next one. That next verse, which would normally be translated, but the earth became. Well, How did you do that? Right? So what somebody will say is they'll say, well, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created everything then. And then, at some point in the future, so sometime, when did the dinosaurs happen? I don't know, somewhere in that gap. When did this happen? Somewhere in that gap. And then some point in the future, the earth became, and then we have the telling of Adam and Eve. Yep. So that's what some people say. Now when they look at it, there's some things about their interpretation that's literal, some that's figurative, but that's what they're looking at. The other one, here's another one, and part of it comes from the struggle with when somebody picks up a rock and they say, how old is this rock? And somebody goes, it's 10,000 years old. And they're like, it says it's 14 million years old. The next one is the argument of an apparent age. This argument goes something like this. Adam and Eve was not created as a fetus, or Adam was not created as a fetus, right? You don't get the idea because he can talk and walk and do that. So you get the idea that Adam was created with an apparent age. He looked like he was 40 or 30 or 20, but he was a second old. So he had apparent age. So the folks that argue apparent age would be if somebody holds up a rock and says, how old is this? They'd say it's 10,000 years old, but it looks 14 billion. Does that make sense? It's their argument. And then there's the other one that's a very traditional one. That's the traditional one that we count back generations back to in the beginning, and we go this, and we go 6,000 years ago, God started everything. And that's a very, very little. Does that make sense? And then I turn around and I said, or is it something else? And I lean towards something else. And the reason I lean towards something else is because I had a professor once said, the problem with Genesis is we walk at Genesis with our own questions. Or our own interpretation, and we try to get Genesis to justify. Why don't you just look at Genesis and see what Genesis is trying to say to us? If we do that, we get something else. So we'll go into this. Now, a lot of Christian community, there's going to be debate, there'll be debate within here, and that's okay. It's okay. We don't have to all think one way or another. If I hit one of your babies right there and you love it, I'm not trying to convince you away from it. What I'm trying to say, though, is, hey, in our disagreements, how are we supposed to handle it? Well, a few weeks ago we talked about within the community, how do we handle disagreements? With love, right? That person that has the disagreement, it's the weaker, stronger brother thing, right? And we should always have that diversity. That's good. All right, so we're going to move on. All right, so how about debates, disagreements with those outside the community? Here's a big list of these. These are big ones, right? Evolution versus creation. Would you agree that that's a big debate? Okay, young earth versus old earth. Is that a big debate? Accident versus divine, or design. Purposeless versus purposefulness. Purpose. Alone versus love. Let me tell you this. We do have debates with the outside world, but doggone it, we fight on the wrong hills. We spend all our energy fighting evolution and creation. And it doesn't solve anything. We got to pick the hills which we will fight on. See, winning one of those hills isn't going to necessarily give us the other one. And that's what happens is we sit this, if we could just show somebody that this rock is 10,000 years old, then we'll win them. No, they'll be just as damned. Where we need to be spending our energy is telling people that they're not alone in the universe, that they're loved. That they're not an accident, that they're purposed. That's what they need to hear. Spend our energy on the right hills. So, having said all that, see, because I have to come back to it and say, when I argue somebody, I always got to figure out, why am I doing it? Am I trying to win the argument, or am I trying to spread the good news? Am I giving them good news? No, so often I start talking to somebody and I want to intellectually crush them. Is that passing the gospel?
Not really.
No. Not at all. It is.
Yeah.
It's worse than that.